Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm just gonna admit a few more folks and we will get started very shortly. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Amelia Lochner-Malave. I'm a staff member with the New York State chapter of NASW. And this is a chapter chat on the New York Hope Project. I just have a few church announcements before we begin. One thing is that I'm turning on our live transcript right now. So if you need to use that transcript, it should be right on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can click and drag and drop that to wherever on the screen you would like, so it doesn't cover up the presentation or someone's face. You also have the option to click that caret and do hide subtitle so it doesn't come up if it's distracting you, or view full transcript so you can see the full transcript while the presentation is happening. I want to encourage everyone to use that chat box. Let us know where you're coming from. Let us know why you're here, why you registered. Feel free to use it to ask questions or talk to your colleagues in the chat. Another thing that you can use is your reactions. Give a thumbs up, celebration if we can find a reason to celebrate today. And lastly, I'm going to say that this program is not a CE program. We have many CEs available through the New York State chapter. We have many free CEs and multiple options each month. So if you're looking for CEs, I'm going to put that schedule into the chat box. I just want to be explicit that this program today is not a CE program. Lastly, please do keep muted during the presentation, but at the end, feel free to unmute yourself and we can have a conversation or ask any questions that we have about the program. So without taking up more time, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter today, Richard Caliendo.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Caliendo, and I am the Physical Health, Behavioral Health Program Specialist for New York Project Hope. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the history of New York Project Hope, the scope of services that New York Project Hope has provided and will continue to provide for some time, okay? And we'll get into a little bit of what the grant project really involves and who our audience is and people that we serve. So why don't we get started? Okay, so New York Project Hope is a statewide crisis counseling program that helps all New Yorkers. Okay, the service is free, it's confidential, and it really operates within this FEMA model. And so let me talk to you a little bit about the history. Early last year in 2020, we all recognized that our communities really across the nation and the world were suffering because of the COVID-19 pandemic. FEMA has this crisis counseling program service that has really been historically used in natural disasters and terrorist attacks. So hurricanes, 9/11, and the model of service involves coming in for a fairly short period of time and providing crisis counseling services in typically a very focused area, because you can imagine a hurricane hits an area and it may damage the infrastructure of a community, and people are suffering emotionally a lot of times because of lost homes. They may be suffering financially, and there's a lot going on in those communities, but it's a disaster that hit during a time period, and there's a fairly predictable trajectory of a response that occurs after a disaster. When you look at disaster psychology, that people go through that shock and they really rely on community resources, but a lot of times they may not be familiar with the community resources. So crisis counselors will come in and provide a lot of that paraprofessional counseling. It's not clinical counseling, connect individuals to community resources, and then help them transition into that post-disaster life. And then the crisis counseling program will phase out. So here with this pandemic, FEMA said to New York, we have this grant opportunity for you to be able to help your communities. And New York specifically the Office of Mental Health, the OMH, agreed to take on this grant and contract with over 50 providers at this point to deliver crisis counseling services. And we were in this position where we have this model through FEMA, the crisis counseling program. That's a great model, but the pandemic wasn't this one-time hit. It was kind of like this ebbing and flowing, moving target, and people are experiencing all types of emotions throughout the last year, and they still are. It was changing. So after we contracted with over 50 providers, we really worked with them closely on reaching their community, building partnerships, coalition building, and then delivering all of the crisis counseling services. And we'll go into a little bit of what the scope of services really involve, okay? Some of the challenges that we saw with communities and individuals included, people feeling stressed, anxious, a lot of isolation. As you can imagine, many people are struggling with isolation. Those that may have had pre-existing mental health diagnoses or maybe substance use disorders. Those got worse, and those that didn't, they were more prone to develop some of these problems. So the isolation we saw really causing some major issues in our communities. There was a lot of normal reactions to a very different situation, right? So I think a lot of these emotional and behavioral reactions to the disaster were fairly normal. So what our program provided was kind of like this sense of, I think, relief to communities and individuals that what I'm experiencing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic is a fairly universal response. And in a world that was very isolated, I think it was really nice for individuals to hear that from crisis counselors, right? Or really from our media. And we're going to talk a bit about how New York Project Hope is not just a crisis counselor giving individual crisis counseling, but there's a lot of public education. There's more of that public health, that population health perspective that we reach the majority of people through our media, our website, through a lot of secondary education. And in that, we can even hone in a little bit more specifically. We try to help New Yorkers understand that these are normal, reactions to a very abnormal situation. We really try to help get them back to their pre-disaster baseline. So wherever they were functioning before the disaster, and there's a very large variance in that, we help them understand where their baseline was and how we can help them get back there, whether that's by utilizing crisis counseling services or by connecting them to community resources or somewhere in between, a little bit of both. So let's talk about the scope of services. Really, that CCP program, we call it, the crisis counseling program, that FEMA model, includes individual crisis counseling, which sometimes might be brief encounters, right? Or it might be a longer encounter. We do group crisis counseling. We do public education. We do a lot of really resource linkage, which is different than case management. Okay, so we don't do formal clinical counseling. We don't do formal case management, but we help link individuals to resources. So what that means is there are a lot of times where you'll see a participant or an individual. We call it like kind of triggering for further need, whether it's an outpatient therapist or maybe it's somewhere that will help them with food insecurity or home insecurity. And we'll do an assessment and a referral, but we're not going to call them the next day, make sure they made their appointment. We're not going to make the call for them. We're not going to do any of that case management stuff, okay? It's really a bit of a softer resource linkage. In the start of this program, really, and it's interesting how this developed. It really started by the state OMH providing a response to the pandemic and setting up a bit of an emotional support helpline, right? And then that developed into this crisis counseling program that was a much more structured, paid staff and trained staff model that set up a statewide crisis helpline. Okay, and that has been a big pillar of New York Project Hope, is a statewide uh, crisis helpline. Okay, and we'll go into the information about that. But then we also contracted with community providers that are throughout several counties in New York, and we're expanding, and we'll go through those counties too. But a lot of this was done virtually, right? We were kind of forced to do it virtually, where we've never done that before through a crisis counseling program. And as time has gone on, we've been able to really meet the community where they're at. And now we're doing a lot of what we call boots on the ground. We're in the field, which in all practicality means that crisis counselors are going out in pairs, and they're going into neighborhoods and communities that we can find through the data that they've been hit harder. And in a sense, what I mean by hit harder is that, there's higher infection rates in that area, there's higher rates of unemployment, there's higher mortality rates. We know that these communities have been affected more. So we really help provide more really targeted crisis counseling. What we also do too is help our providers of crisis counseling services recognize the special populations to serve, okay? Communities of color, those that are experiencing unemployment, those that have really been impacted by the pandemic in all these different unique ways. Children and youth, the aging population, parents and caregivers, right? So there's so many different special populations that we do ongoing professional development and training to help providers understand how to serve those special populations. One of the big components is psychoeducation and public education too. So think about it. If you're serving all of New York, there's going to be a huge group of people that will simply benefit from just looking at our social media and getting a coping tip, or maybe browsing our website and reading an article on parenting through the pandemic, right? Or perhaps looking at one of our learning modules or one of our videos, okay, that are on the website. There are those that might just go to a public education presentation and hear a little bit about self-care and resiliency. But then there's, a smaller amount of people that really will go to the next step, and they'll engage in crisis counseling one-on-one or in a group format. So again, New York Project Hope really looks to take that public health perspective on trying to reach as many New Yorkers as possible and give them options on how to engage in our crisis counseling program. And being free, being confidential really opens the door to reaching a lot of people, which is a great component of this program. So here's our emotional support helpline. This is a statewide one, okay, where anyone can call, and we've even had calls, from people out of state a lot of times too. And to date, I know we have over 70,000 calls, okay, and that's growing. The number's right there. You can find it on our website too. You can actually do a clicked call on our website, which is really cool, and that we've seen that be very successful. So if someone's looking at the website on their phone and they're reading through New York Project Hope and they're like, wow, I can really connect to, people that are having some of these experiences, and these coping tips seem pretty helpful. I would like to talk to someone. They just press a button and it calls. It's great. And so there's structured hours there too, because it's not a hotline, it's a helpline. And a lot of times people will get kind of confused, like, okay, you're a crisis counseling program, you have trained crisis counselors. Do I call when I'm in crisis? Whether that's a psychiatric crisis or really a life crisis. And not necessarily, it's not that we're turning those people away at all. It's just our program really responds to the crisis, and COVID-19, the pandemic, is the crisis, and we help people through that crisis. So that might be a better kind of like framework when you're thinking about New York Project Hope. We do make a lot of referrals and kind of warm handoffs to the suicide prevention hotline when someone's in more of a psychiatric crisis, okay? So we have provider agencies in 12 counties, okay, which includes all of New York City, really, and the counties listed right here. And we're expanding too. We're working with new counties, and we're working on bringing on new providers. And as of right now, we are contracted through December. Okay, we've been here really since last spring, and it's almost like a startup program. We really started it up from scratch last year, in the beginning of last year, and we've slowly grown through last year and into this year. And we're contracted right now up through December. There could be a possibility we go further, but that's up to FEMA and New York State and all that fun stuff that comes with grant work. But for right now, we'll be here in these counties with the provider agencies and the emotional support helpline that I just showed you through December. Our website is something that we're really proud of because we think that it really took on a life of its own. We've never had such a strong media presence in a crisis counseling program before. Whether it was a hurricane or 9/11, so on and so on. There's always been a media component, but this pandemic has brought such an urgency to focus on media, because that was our primary way to reach New York, was through social media or website, through radio ads, through paid ads, through all these different ways to help people that are in their home really understand that we're here and this is how we can help you and this is how you can reach us. So our website's had over 1.5 million views so far, and it has a lot of different components to it. It has this connect section that really talks about connecting to a provider agency or someone on the emotional support helpline. It talks about a lot of resources that you can get connected to that are outside of New York Project Hope, more statewide resources or community-specific resources. The cope and relax sections are really cool because you can go into a lot of articles where you just kind of read and get some psychoeducation, get some tips. And the relax section is more practical. You can engage in some mindfulness, some relaxation strategies and practices. It's really cool stuff. It's primarily for the public, but there's a section on there for the providers that can actually get into the provider portals and crisis counselor portals, where we provide resources and a lot of ability to learn and have professional development. There's a connection to a learning management system and LMS for modules and all this fun stuff. So the website has been a huge strength for our program to just grow and develop. Social media, we've found that this has been really awesome, connecting to a lot of the youth, right? I mean, Instagram, Twitter, even Pinterest, Facebook, we have, a real strong growth. It's in the social media world, it's hard to grow organically within such a short program, but we found a lot of success in the growth here. There's a lot of not only awareness of who we are, but there's a lot of education. So we'll have coping tips popping up, short videos that will kind of lead you into larger videos that are on our website. We encourage you to go on and follow us, whether it's your agency or you personally. You'll learn a lot about what New York Project Hope is doing. You'll find, updates on new articles and a lot of good stuff. We really try to match the tone of what's happening throughout New York during the pandemic too. So we're proud of that. We think it's a big part of our service, and we hope that you can share it too, even with your agency. If you share some of our social media, that would be really great. I think it would be a good synergistic approach to just helping part of our community. Talked a little bit about resource linkage and our community engagement. Cheryl Gersler is our community engagement specialist. So if you're listening to this right now and you're feeling like, New York Project Hope could really be there for some people that we're serving, whether it's in your agency or in your practice, feel free to reach out to Cheryl. She can certainly come in and do a tailored talk to your community and see how New York Project Hope can partner with you and work with you to help out who you're serving. I know this is a little bit more of like kind of like a relaxed setting. It's something that we can go into more of a conversation. So I wanted to start to transition into maybe taking any questions or having a conversation about New York Project Hope and how we can help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. If there's anyone that has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves, write something into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I see Philip, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to say hi. Richard and I go back a ways. So first
Hey,
and
Phil.
foremost, hey, good to see you again.
You too.
I do have a question. Right now, I think a lot of people are experiencing stress about returning to the workplace if they've been working remotely, and organizations aren't necessarily sure of how best to bring people back. Is there information along those lines available through Project Hope for either individuals or for organizations as they're looking at, getting back, more to in-office services?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we have been keeping our pulse on this in a lot of different ways. We work closely with a lot of EAP groups. A lot of our referrals come through EAP groups, right? And we've been working on the individual basis with people that are having a hard time transitioning back, just the stress with that comes, but also with organizations trying to provide that public education, right? Sometimes it's as simple as providing some psychoeducation and even some group work on being okay when things aren't okay, right? Trying to work through that discomfort and different coping tips to manage the stress through really any transition, and then applying that to the transition of getting back into the workplace, whether it has to do with fear and anxiety of the new Delta variant, or if it's just how do I transition from giving care to my children after I've adjusted to doing it in this new way, working at home and juggling all the different things I need to juggle, to now having to get back into the office and transitioning my kids into new caretakers and all of this. So New York Project Hope, depending if you want to work with a provider agency in your county, could come in and provide some public education, or they can set up groups, or they can simply just give their number to provide individual crisis counseling to people that are having a hard time with this transition back into not only society, but into the workplace too.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there anyone who has other questions? I did get a message and they asked, and I'm not sure if this was covered, if this is only through the phone or if you can use other mediums such as Zoom.
So yeah, it's been used through the phone, through video platforms, even texting. We got very creative and flexible when we were in the place where it was really hard to get into the field and work with people in person. And I think that's been both a really strong attribute of this program, as much as it's been difficult, because we have that down now. We have the virtual presence and the telephonic piece down. And over the last 2 months, we've really been helping programs transition to in-person, but we didn't have a running start with the in-person work. So it's great because now that we're doing the in-person stuff, we have the virtual stuff already down, but we're building up that in-person presence. So now there's really just a lot of options of how you can connect with a counselor and how you can connect with really any part of New York Project Hope services. But the virtual presence is still very strong, and you're going to see the physical presence just really grow through the summer.
Thank you very much. All right, do folks have any other questions? Like I said, this was recorded, and we're going to send it out to everyone that registered and put it in our update upcoming next week. Feel free to write into the chat or unmute yourself if you have any remaining questions. Gonna give a moment. All right, well, I just want to thank you, Richard, for your time, for the work that OMH is doing. Oh, we do have a question. You mentioned people who are out of work. Do you offer options for someone who is unemployed to get directions to services?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So New York Project Hope, with it being a crisis counseling program, we provide services to those individuals that have been impacted by the disaster. Unemployment has certainly been some of the collateral damage of this disaster. We know that. So we certainly do provide that work around not only the emotional experience of going through unemployment, all the stress, but we would help connect them to resources that are related to unemployment, right? And so that's really interesting about this disaster because there's been such diversity in how it's impacted someone, whether it's financial distress, it's unemployment, if it's more emotional, if it's behavioral, if it's cognitive. There's been so many different areas that we've really helped our crisis counselors understand what individuals may be bringing to the table when they're working with them. And unemployment's a big one. So that community connection piece, when we're really helping an individual access their community resources, it's really the whole gamut. And unemployment services, whether it's the Department of Labor or some more specified nonprofits that help individuals that are going through financial distress, that's all part of what we do.
And Risa, let us know if you have any follow-up questions to that. And you might see this. Nora says this has been very informative and she thanks you.
Yeah.
Yes, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes,
great.
we can.
Oh, great. I figured it was easier than going back and forth in chat. Thank you very much. I'm really excited about your program. And I did want to ask further questions because there are people I know who have help with emotional things, but they may not have help with some of the practical aspects that have gone on, like unemployment and things like that. Can they come to you if they have some help, but not other help?
Of course, when we see this all the time, is that you'll have someone that is coming to you and they don't really want to do any of the emotional work, right? They're like, I'm calling because I don't know where to go. I'm calling this number, no one's picking up, and I just need to get connected with some financial help here, and I don't know where to go in my county, right? And the crisis counselor might kind of try to start, a bit of that encounter, that crisis counseling encounter, where you're like, well, tell me about how this has been for you. I mean, just hearing over the phone, it sounds like this is a pretty tough situation. How have you been coping with this? Right. And then we say, I don't want to talk about that. Just give me the number, right? Which is okay. And other times, we get people that call and they say, I don't even really know what I'm calling for. I've called a couple times and it's been helpful just to talk. It's just really good to talk. And a crisis counselor really will help guide that and see if there's any community resources that would be helpful, because in building that rapport and doing the crisis counseling, you may understand, wow, okay, this area of their life has been impacted, whether it's maybe they're going through a divorce because of the pandemic stress, and they have financial struggles and all this other stuff's going on, and then resources related to that will come up and they'll get connected to those resources. So you'll see that people are coming to this program for all different types of reasons, and 99% of the time it's because of the pandemic, something that the pandemic brought into their life, and we'll help them through that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And what are the hours that they answer the phone there?
So with Emotional Support Helpline, I believe it's 8 to 10. It's 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. You take a look at that again, and you can go on the website and it gives all that information. For providers, okay, so for providers in the community, there is a little bit of variance. It's not standardized across all the providers, but typically, it's very similar to 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. You'll see some differences in terms of, how big their teams are and what they're capable of doing, but you'll find similar hours. They do a lot of work on the weekends too. They're out there, in the communities on the weekends now, trying to connect with people, whether it's, at parks or farmers markets, or right now we see a lot of, summer camp work, a lot of, the after school programs that turn into summer programs, that type of work. There's our strategy into reaching people was building partnerships through community organizations, and then working our way down. So we had to really do that when we were all in somewhat of like an isolated quarantine state. But we found that's really flourishing now, because all those existing relationships, they know who we are, they enjoy our work, and now we're being invited into really their territory to do the work, which is awesome. So as you hear me talking about that, think about the work that you're doing and if it makes sense to partner with New York Project Hope. We often make it very easy because we're free, right? And we have a pretty good caliber of staff and a range of services.
Thank you so much. This is really good to know about.
And we do have some other questions in our chat. One is there a limit to how many sessions someone can have for counseling support, as well as how is this funded and how many professionals are on your staff?
Yeah, of course. So there's a couple questions there. So we'll start with funding. It's federally funded through FEMA, right? So FEMA really responds to disasters across the whole country and provides all types of support, whether it's infrastructure, crisis counseling, so on and so on. And so we applied to the grant, and FEMA really opened up the grant to the nation, because United States really suffered from this as a whole, and states applied to FEMA for the grant. We were awarded the grant in early last year, and we started to build a program. So, and then looking at the crisis counselors, how many crisis counselors? I mean, we have, I don't know the exact number of the emotional support helpline, but I know it was over 50 at one point, and I imagine it's still hovering around there. They've taken over 70,000 calls, since the start of the program. So, and they're keeping up with the demand. So I think, if the demand were to grow, we would keep up with it. For the provider agencies, they range from, having from 1 to 3 teams. I would say the average is probably 1 to 2 teams. And on the team, it's each team has 6 crisis counselors, plus or minus a couple. So, you can do the math there with over 50 provider agencies. If they have 1 to 2 teams with, 6 crisis counselors, you can imagine that there's a lot of work going on across those 12 counties. So the capacity is quite large. We can certainly, continue to serve the community if the need is there. And we're looking at expanding in other areas. So.
And Ivy, let us know if you have any follow-up questions.
Okay.
All right, well, it seems like the questions have died down. I want to ask Richard if there's anything that you want to say in closing.
Yeah, given that I'm speaking to a group of social workers, right? The question has come up a lot of times of, I already have an outpatient provider. I already have a therapist. I don't really need crisis counseling. And, I just want to kind of address that question or that concern is that, we don't provide clinical counseling, right? There are a lot of times it's paraprofessionals. We have team leaders that do have clinical experience that oversee the crisis counselors. But we see this largely as a preventative service a lot of times, so individuals don't get to the point of, a psychiatric emergency or getting to the point of where they're just feeling exhausted and run down. Just that simple. So it may be for someone that is on a wait list, and they can't get into a therapist, but they might need some of that buffering. It may be for someone that just needs to call and talk to someone because they're experiencing pandemic related stress or just stress in general. And probably the pandemic has made it much worse. And if someone already has a counselor between appointments, I don't think it's a bad idea, or just simply going on our website to read some articles, have some psychoeducation, all those pieces. I think it's a great resource for someone that you're providing a clinical service to just use New York Project Hope as kind of an adjunct or a buffer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you to Project Hope as well. Like I said, we're going to send this out to everyone as a recording, and it'll be available on our YouTube. So I appreciate everyone joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.